It's not a U.S. phenomenon. It's this technology is pervasive around the world. Again, we take it to our doctors. We train our doctors on these things because it takes some training on different kinds of products to do this. And we get a really good reception from the doctors who really want to be digital and really want to move forward. And, products like, our programs like Adapt and all, that when you're going to do the majority of your cases from a digital standpoint, Adapt really gets them ready for, if you're going to do, 80% clear aligners or digital in your practice, you're going to have to do teens. And to do teens, you have to be able to do the whole ratio of, what we call tweens or preteens up to teens to be able to do that. And we teach them, our technology in order to address that. So it's not a U.S. phenomenon, John. It's a global phenomenon.
Okay. And maybe I'm sorry, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, to add to that, we have products that, as Joe was describing, to be able to help doctors treat the preteen cases, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds with Invisalign First, the more complicated cases with mandibular advancement, so on. So we have, in a qualified doctor's hand, he or she should be able to do 80+% of the cases. Some are doing 100% of their cases with Invisalign. Yet when you look at the market share of those 15 million orthodontic case starts, it's single digit everywhere, including the US. So we've made a lot of progress, and you're right to say, yes, it's a key growth driver, and it really helps drive that orthodontic utilization to grow within teens. But even after all these years, we're still such a low market share, and that's why we're really excited about the opportunities that we can drive in this space.
Helpful, guys. And maybe just to push you a little bit, is the demand for Adapt accelerating, call it coming out of the summer into the winter? So Adapt is sort of hand holding some of those practices as they want to move more fully to a digital solution. Maybe Joe, talk to us on the demand that you've seen for the Adapt program, on the back end of the pandemic.
John, we have to actually staff Adapt up, with special resources, consulting resources, people that understand the clinical aspects and the business aspects. So we basically staffed for 700 episodes this year around the world. And we've seen really good demand for that. Since I don't know that we're being, when we look at it, we're going to report anything beyond that. We know we're getting a lot of pull from it overall. And then, there's some DSOs out there that think about it too in a broader sense of how do I go across my entire organization. So we really feel good about the pull on it. And obviously COVID and, less of an invasive approach to orthodontics has helped to accelerate that too.
Okay. I've got a couple more on teen. I don't want to nitpick, but I think the teen growth was just south of 30% in the third quarter. And if overall teen case starts were close to normal in the quarter, it would seem that clearly Invisalign Teen's still taking a ton of market share, right? You're growing 26, 27% in a market that's growing maybe 2 or 3. But it seems like the share gains didn't accelerate meaningfully, right? Because teen grew over 30% in 2019. And please let me know if that makes sense, if I was clear, but I'm going to ask you guys to elaborate there. In other words, is it just sort of a byproduct of different seasonality with teen in 2020? Do you still sort of sit here today and have high conviction that you're seeing the share of chair thesis really play out into 2021?
John, again, COVID's really distorted a lot of equilibriums that you see in the market. And John can weigh in on this too. He's done a lot of the analysis, but we actually see a much longer teen season this year than we've seen last year too. Yeah. So the third quarter, I wouldn't take that data point as necessarily representative of our overall teen performance. John?
To add, in China, for example, during the crisis and then recovery, many of the teens or the kids were still in school into July, near the end of July, which would normally be teen season. And then you have places like the US where, maybe some classes have been virtual, kids going to high school, junior high. There's maybe not that demand in July and August to get their procedures done right before they go back to school, because they have some time as even school has started, because they're not going to school directly. So I think you have, just as Joe said, some of the COVID impacts to kind of the demand and that behavior, but we feel good about the investments that we've made, the growth opportunities that we have for teen and adult.
So in other words, that teen season might be a little bit more elongated, I think, John, as you just put it, dragging in a 4Q, maybe even a 1Q. The pandemic's thrown some seasonality up into the year.
Yeah, it has for sure, Jim.
Okay. One more, Joe and John, for me on teen share of chair. I think about, the devoted, pardon me, not to bring names into this, but the Boschkins of the world, the 98% Invisalign does everything Invisalign. and then the non-adopters, and then the bronzes that could go to golds or diamonds. Where's the pull? Where's the demand coming from in the pandemic? Have you seen it broaden out? I think of the guys up at 98%, and they can only go, their practice can only go higher based on overall market growth, right? I mean, they can't go much higher than 98, 99%. Are you seeing the rare non-Invisalign orthodontist come into the fold? Are you seeing the outreach from a bronze who wants to go to gold or diamond? Is that more pervasive, Joe, coming out of the pandemic than what you've seen in years past?
I mean, the breadth of the pool on our product line, and we're talking about, I think a lot of your comments are about the United States right now, John, is across those brackets. John can give you more specificity for it, but this is not a single variable equation. You know, we're seeing bronze doctors weigh in. You see guys like David Boschkin out there advertising aggressively because, you know, obviously it's not, you know, wires and brackets conversion in David's case. It's just, you know, how many Invisalign patients can he really bring through, you know, and address. And obviously a teen segment's a big one for him too. But we have, that's been one of the interesting things about this whole rebound. It's been a broad rebound. It's been global. It's been across all these different, you know, just bracket tiers that we work through the Advantage programs. It's been across GP. It's been across ortho. It's been broad. John, any thoughts?
I mean, to add, you have doctors that did a lot of volume with us before COVID. They're doing a lot of volume now. And then you have other doctors who maybe didn't do as many cases before COVID who are now in. And we sold to over 70,000 doctors for the first time ever in the third quarter. And it's just broader, like Joe said, many different tiers. And that's what we really were encouraged by. And we also saw it show up on the iTero side. You probably have some questions on iTero, but really you saw these doctors who maybe had one scanner or no scanner. And these no scanners might have been doctors we didn't do a lot of volume with. They came in the third quarter, bought an iTero, really started to want to digitize their practice so that they could adapt to the situation that they're in. And that was very encouraging for us.
One more down this road, and then I'm going to shift over to, you know, the GP market. But Joe, maybe talk about the organization's decision to bifurcate the sales force and go specifically after GPs and orthos. I think you did that in Europe before bringing it to the US. I believe it's pretty opportune timing. I mean, how did that work out for you in the throes of the pandemic in order to really be able to tailor to each end market's needs?
You know, John, just to sit back and digest the question for a second, you don't have to be in the industry too long. You know, when I first came in, when you make a call on a general practitioner or a general dentist, you make a call on an ortho, they're two different worlds. I mean, they're really two different worlds. They think in different ways. That all orthos do are orthodontic procedures, and the specificity of what they do and how they approach it is apparent. You walk into a GP office, you know, they're a specialist. They ortho specialists. They're, you know, obviously from a, you know, internal treatment standpoint, they have several kind of workflows that they use, and they think about, you know, Invisalign in the sense of an episode and how do I fit it into my workflow and all. And that led to the thought process about, John, I think going back 2.5 years ago when Simon was running Europe, we said, hey, let's segment these marketplaces, have dedicated sales forces, because, you know, we could see products like iGo and all these things were going to be segmented, and obviously those were set up for GPs. And we tried that in Europe, and we started in the UK and moved it to Germany, and now we're moving it to several countries. Incredibly successful. We haven't talked much about Japan, but Japan went to that about a year and a half ago. Very successful too. So we took those learnings and we moved to the United States, and we bifurcated the sales force between GPs and orthos this year. Now, obviously, it wasn't the best timing for an experiment, but this is an experiment. We're very confident it will work, and it is working right now. We feel very strongly that as coming out of this pandemic, the strong growth that we're seeing right now in GPs, a lot of it has to do with that dedicated sales force and how they're acting. So going forward, John, you'll see this where we can in market. You'll see us do it more and more, because these are two different constituents. And when we talk about that 500 million patient market that's out there, they're in those GP chairs. And but the GPs don't necessarily want to completely correct them out of inclusion to occlusion. You know, they just want to do the social 6 or some lower crowding that happens to all of us as we get older. Versus an orthodontic that will take often, you know, a pure change of changing a malocclusion back to perfection.
It's interesting what you said about Japan. I didn't know that. I mean, I think back to when you bifurcated the sales force in Europe, and Simon was able to accelerate the growth rates off of bigger numbers. It seems like you now have a lot of data points, and I know, Joe, per your saying, pulling noise and signal in this environment isn't probably very easy to do, but I think about EMEA and the reacceleration, Japan, the reacceleration, it seems like this bifurcated sales strategy is really resonating for the company, I would assume.
No, we feel very strongly that it works. We have enough data points to tell us it does, John.
Okay, great. Let's go to the other very large end market, lower acuity opportunity within GPs, the 500 million number that you provided at the Analyst Day. You've got iGo. You introduced Moderate. You have a lot of features and functionality associated with iTero. Maybe just talk to Align's holistic offering in that lower acuity adult market, how it compares to 3 to 4 years ago. And Joe, in your opinion, I mean, I know you're always going to innovate, but do you have essentially all the pieces of the puzzle that you need to really go after the 500 million opportunity?
Hey, John, just to kind of answer your last question first, we have all the pieces of the puzzle. How we lay those pieces in and when we lay those pieces in are really important, and they can be by country. Some of these pieces will work better by country, versus other ones, and we understand that. But I feel good about the low acuity marketplace. I think having this digital platform that we have in the sense of like iGo, just time is of the essence if you're a general dentist, and you scan with iGo and immediately tells you can do this case in less than 9 months. That's a big deal. That's not easy to do either. That's that whole digital platform between iTero and our product line, and a huge amount of AI and computations that have to take place in order to give the doctor, that confidence that it works. And, one of the things about the GP that's really interesting too is you don't want to mess a case up with a general dentist because they're seeing 1,500 to 2,000 patients a year. This is US data, but it tracks pretty well worldwide too. If they mess up a case in some way and they can't straighten people's teeth, and that spreads through their whole practice. They can get, poor ratings obviously on the internet. The referrals will go down. There's families involved. And so we feel we give them a huge amount of confidence in using our product with that kind of sophistication. So do we have all the products? Look, we have E5. E5 is a simple product where you haven't worn your retainers and you want to, take a lateral or something and put it back to where it was. That makes sense. We have, what you talked about is our light product line, our iGo product line. There's a number of things that we can do to really address this segment. So, and that is again, that, 500 million patient marketplace that's out there, that honestly, if there's some relapse from braces years ago, they're not going back to wires and brackets. We all know that. If anyone's here, they wouldn't do that, right? But if you can, do an E5 and you can get that thing done in 10 weeks, I mean, why not, right? Or E10. John, anything to add to that?
I think that's exactly it. I think when you look at the opportunity, it's got to be also working with the general dentist in the way that they work and providing the care in the way that they work. So they get a scan when they come in. It's part of the procedures that they go through. And especially as they come, as they go through kind of that checkup at the end and so on, they can be able to explain how your teeth have moved. And then more importantly, be able to show them where your teeth could be with corrective procedure or corrective products like Joe was describing. Maybe you need 10 sets of aligners to get your teeth aligned in this way. And so we're working with general practitioners in a way that they work. And especially in a COVID, post-COVID environment, that's critical because they don't have the patient chair time that they might have had before. You've got procedures in place to limit, the number of chairs that you might have, or people can't wait in a waiting room and they have to wait outside. There's a lot of things that have to go on with this. And the digital technology that we can bring can really help the doctors maintain the productivity that they have and really give them a lot of tools so that they can say, look, wow, as part of the regular procedure, the process that they have, they're not adding really anything to it, but yet they can show those patients what their teeth could look like and then be able to provide that to them. Is very powerful. And in this environment, I think it's become a necessity. Prior to COVID, it was a productivity tool, but it wasn't maybe as necessary for general dentists. Now it becomes a necessity because they can't see as many patients as they used to be able to see.
And John, just to stick with you for a moment, I think one of the things coming out of the Analyst Day that was interesting, when you talked about the lower acuity market, I think you highlighted, and I believe this is correct, that the ASP, the realized ASP on the lower acuity has actually gone up over the past couple of years. And, maybe just talk to the investor base about that. I think everyone was worried about competition going down, complexity, and you guys were going to have to lower price. But, what is that, effectively slotting in the Moderates of the world, the iGos of the world to offset the E5s? But maybe if you could just elaborate on that.
That's right, John. And really, when you think about our ASP, and that's why we wanted to separate at Investor Day, to really just remind people that you have a comprehensive products and a group of products for that, mandibular advancement and our comprehensive products. And then you also have the non-comprehensive products like you described with E5 and E7 and 10 and so on. These that have, lesser aligners. And really, when we look at the ASPs for those by themselves, they've actually gone up over the last 3 years. And really, from a non-comprehensive price, we've seen price increases in ASP. And on our comprehensive product, it's been relatively flat. It's just that when you combine them together and you look at overall ASP, you get an impact that it doesn't necessarily represent what the business is doing. So we just try to be able to separate those out, let people know. And because the reality is our non-comprehensive is growing faster than our comprehensive. They're both growing really fast, but non-comprehensive grows faster. This is this 500 million potential patient opportunity. And the good thing about that is the ASPs are flat to slightly increasing over these past years as well.
Very helpful. Within the GP opportunity, Swift, and I think our team did hopefully a decent job earlier this year, sniffing out this trial that you ran on Swift. The timing, Joe, again, it was right before COVID hit. I think you had it going on in a couple of markets in Arizona, Phoenix, Tucson. Maybe just talk to us about the offering. Was the $3,000 price point for the consumer right? Was the $80-ish monthly the right one for the consumer? And was that $900 or so lab fee, effective with the doc? And then we can go from there.
Yeah, John, I think it wasn't as much of a trial as it should have been to be able to answer those questions, succinctly and clearly. And, I think we had it on a couple of weeks. We had to pull it off, because, COVID just crashed the whole market. And what wasn't COVID? It was the government shutting down the dental offices. In the end, it really crushed us in that sense. But I think, John, if you step back from that equation, what are we trying to solve in that sense is, there's some, potential patients out there that want some assurity on price. We were kind of experimenting with that variable to see what that meant. Also, as we needed a product to fit that would, be in the less than 9 months kind of a range. We know is a sweet spot, from a GP standpoint overall. And, iGo and those products kind of work that way. So, we look at that. We have some data. I can't tell you that the data is confirmative that we, that we know exactly what that experiment would be if we did it again today. But like you and John were just talking, I was listening and thinking, is that, we have iGo out there, we have Light, we have non-comp, we have all these product lines that are in the Swift kind of genre. And we have to weigh that, that kind of intense advertising and focus for that one product line against a broader amount of advertising that we do to attract patients into dental offices and also orthodontic offices too. And when you look at our demand patterns right now, we're paying really close attention to that. So I can't tell you there's anything that we knew what variables we were going after in that equation and why to do it. We didn't run it long enough to tell you, hey, this play really works and we're going to expand it in some way. John,
okay.
any?
No, I think that's exactly. I think we learn for every investment that we make on what it drives and helps grow our business. And with Swift, I think it's a realization that we have a product portfolio that can help accommodate doctors where they're trying to treat these patients. The key is to get that demand in, and that's why even during the crisis, we've kept that advertising going, kept the marketing spend going, because we knew we're in an underpenetrated market. We learn from the investments that we make. We see a response. We kept that investment going. We kept our salespeople coming to the office. We've really worked with Adapt and really tried to make that program, digitize that practice, but to be able to drive that demand and that conversion within the office. So all these things we learn, we iterate on, and ultimately we bring back out into the market to be able to drive growth. And that's really what, Swift was. It's kind of that learning that we have. But it can show up in a lot of different ways within the marketplace.
And guys, just to push you a little bit there, is there a part of that 500 million though that is hard to tap into without a monthly plan? I mean, I think about all the responsible consumers here in the US where they can afford anything if it's less than $100 a month. And so to really get, into that 500 million opportunity, do you need that $75, $85, $90 monthly that can help bring them into the practice and sort of whet the appetite and then convert them from there? Joe?
We know what you just mentioned, John, is a sweet spot of some consumers. It's not what the overall price is; it's what they have to pay you on a monthly basis. And John, you can talk about some of the financing and things that we're doing in that sense, but we do know that's an area of patient concern. That doesn't necessarily mean that you dictate exactly what the price of the case is. That could be a 5-year kind of scenario rather than a 3-year scenario.
Yeah, and I think doctors are aware of that. I mean, they get it. Many times they do their self-financing, and if they're fortunate to get a payment up front, great. But many times it's payment over a period of time, and doctors have been used to that. And if we can help them find external financing that those doctors then can work with their patients on, I think there is a marketplace for people who just don't want to pay for it up front. They want to pay for it over time. We help accommodate that. So we help try to find these those financing company and the consumers try to work so that they can work together. But then we also do things with our doctors where we can give them extended payment terms and do some of these things to really help them from a working capital standpoint so that they can help finance some of the patients that they have. So there's a number of ways to help do this. But in the end, we want those patients to be able to go into treatment. We want them in treatment, and any which way they can is how we try to make it happen.
Okay, maybe one last one on Swift, just to push you a little bit, Joe. If COVID were to go away, let me pick some random date. If COVID goes away, March or April, May of 2021, do we see Swift in the back part of the year? Is it all COVID dependent, or were there certain learnings where you feel like you're still able to tap into this lower acuity opportunity, maybe without a Swift type of program?
John, right now we don't know what we're going to do in that sense. We really don't have a forward-thinking plan. But I can tell you as we've come out of this, as John talked about, we looked at certain marketing campaigns all over the world to see wherever they are, to see what kind of response we get just from a marketing standpoint internationally too. And so we'll weigh all those variables: adding salespeople, where do you advertise, what's the right kind of product. We look at a return on investment and as much as we can see, and whatever we think makes the most sense coming out of this, that's where you'll see us throw our money.
Okay. I'm going to actually step away. I had a nice segue into the next question. But Joe, I want to touch on what you just laid out. John, I remember when you and I marketed years ago, you were talking about the ability in this business to spend and see a return pretty quickly, sort of like a short tail. Can you speak to that? In other words, when we think about the error band or the 20 to 30% growth, the 25 to 30% op margin, do we think about that having a pretty high level of visibility attached to it, because you can go ahead and titrate the spend pretty quickly accordingly, because you see a fast return on the marketing dollars?
I think when we look at this, and I think COVID has really shown the opportunity. I've never been in a business where you can make some of these investment decisions and see such a great opportunity. It starts with a vastly underpenetrated market that we're in. The TAM is large. We have products that can treat with our doctors a multitude of cases, very, very complicated cases, yet we're still such low market share. Teens is single digit, and you add everything together, we're still 12, 13% of the market. When you look at some of those investments, we're finding that there's things that you could do. For example, in the US, we talked about it Investor Day, investing in the NFL, investing with some of these influencers or Charlie D'Amelio and people like that you're still investing in the marketplace, but you're finding different ways to be able to reach those end consumers and patients and getting a response. And what we find is that, this works, and we might say, look, it's not giving as much of opportunity, but you could try different things, even within a market that's as established in the US. And the great thing about that is you can take those learnings from the US and say, how do we apply this to some of the marketing that we want to do in APAC or in EMEA, where we can invest and find these opportunities. And so when we look at this, it's a vastly underpenetrated market, but you can make investments in what we've talked about with sales, splitting the sales force, marketing dollars that we have, operating efficiencies that we have, great products for those doctors, all these different levers to pull. And what I tried to show at Investor Day was kind of that wheel of all those different opportunities that we have to be able to invest in. And it's the opportunities, and also creates a moat for us within the business. But I've never seen such a multivariable equation that you have at a company, where you have all these X's that you can invest in, like I was just describing, to get that output, which is the volume, which is the revenue that we have. And we're going to continue to make adjustments, make investments where it makes sense. Like I said, we kept our sales, kept all of our people. We didn't cut salaries. We didn't cut during this environment because we believe in that market opportunity. And so we kept continued to do that through the second quarter, paid off for us in the third quarter, helped us continue the momentum in the fourth quarter. And we feel good about that.
Okay, great. Very helpful. Thank you. I'm going to pivot over to R&D in the pipeline. At the Analyst Day, maybe one of the only things I didn't hear or get an update on was palatal expansion. And Joe, there was a time period when the target was 2021. Maybe I'm mistaken. I also think it's going to be one of the company's first products that's, direct print, no negative or no mold. And so maybe just talk to us on where palatal stands, how that's playing out, and will it still be a direct print product?
Yeah, I think, John, just to take off where you left off is we don't see any way to do this that's not direct print. And I mean, to do this you have to do this, remember, we're talking about making, tens of thousands of parts a day, right? So you have to have a scalable kind of process. And so, today I'd tell you for palatal expansion, we have the right software, we have the right designs, we've trialed it with, obviously with technology that we can't scale, but just to make sure the algorithms would all work, and it works. What we're struggling with right now is to figure out how to really, in a 3D kind of a way, print this thing at scale. And that's where it stands. We have really good work on this led by a guy named Srini Kaza. I'd argue that Srini, John, he's been with us 21 years, almost from the inception of the company. There's nobody in the world that knows more about process and more about plastics and orthodontics than Srini does. I have all the confidence in the world of he and his team. And, I think, John, we did have a target date of 2021. As usual, your memory's pretty good. And, we're still fighting. I can tell you, though, we won't launch unless we can really guarantee the consistency of that product and its performance, and that we can really service the demand at this size that we think we can. But I would tell you we're close.
Okay. And maybe to push you down a similar road, Joe, I also think it was one time where you and I were marketing, and between meetings, I was bugging you nonstop between meetings, and you might have talked about the ability to direct print, everything, right, longer term. And that wasn't a 2021 date at all. It was longer term. It might have been a 3 to 5 year. Maybe just talk to us. I mean, do we think about palatal as the first step forward in that opportunity? And then, gosh, what could that do to COGS if we had Emory on the line in terms of, I would think that's the biggest expense component in COGS is the printing of the negative, if you would.
Yeah, no, it is. I think if you take the material by weight, John, like the amount of, plastic that we use, 90% of it is a negative, is the mold that you're talking about. And only 10% is the, the Smart Track material that we vacuum form over top of that. So now remember, we produce hundreds of those parts per run on, every one of these STL machines too. So the productivity rates are really honed over time from a weight standpoint and everything else. But when we do, and, this is an equation that's very difficult to solve, but we've learned a lot, and I think we have a good track on several areas. When that does happen, the productivity opportunities here are huge. And it's not just in one location. It allows you to be able to diversify your manufacturing in a more meaningful way and save on transportation costs and different things too, if you do that. So, because you don't necessarily need the same scale economics as what you have with the mold process. So, John, I think this is going to happen. But again, in this kind of business, remember, this is very difficult to do. John, I told you before, I grew up in plastics with GE Plastics, high performance engineering thermoplastics. So what makes this tough is, one, you need a product that's not necessarily hygroscopic, which means it absorbs a lot of water and loses its mechanical properties. In that case, you can't use it. Secondly, it has to be clear. It's got to be clear, right? You can't, put a black liner on people. It's not going to work. We'd rather have wires and brackets. And then thirdly, you got to be able to produce this thing at scale. It has to be able to, produce 700,000, probably by that time, 1 million units a day. And those are the three variables we're working with against Srini and his team. I feel a moderate level of competency in order to understand what the team is doing around these areas. And I feel good about it. And I feel we've made good progress. But John, when you think, I'm excited about that, it just shows you the infant aspect of this business, right? Even though Align now is, looked at as a big company, obviously our market cap is very large, our sales are large or whatever, but almost what John just said about commercial opportunities, we can just say about productivity opportunities too. They're vast in this business. Yeah. They really are. We are just starting out in that sense. And we feel shame on us if we miss these, because we're the company best positioned to understand what that is and was the most experienced to be able to get at it.
No, to that last point, Joe, I mean, honestly, when you talk about the infant nature, I mean, I always say to clients or joke with clients that the back end of this process is wildly sophisticated, right? You're the biggest 3D manufacturing company in the world, manufacturing 500, 600, 700,000 customized parts. But I've said at the front end, please don't take this the wrong way, but it was pretty archaic from 1998 to 2016 or 17, right? I mean, it was that analog process of jamming in a PVS press into someone's mouth. It wasn't only until the past 3 or 4 years where the front end really started to change and was digitized and had all the components that went along with that process.
Hey, but John, you've heard about Alta too, and we presented that at several meetings or whatever. That's another part of that. You have, obviously taking out, the previous impression thing, moving in iTero. But behind that is how do we make this treatment planning as efficient and fast and accurate as doctors as possible? We have the data and experience to be able to do that. And you'll see that kind of development shortly too.
Okay. I'm going to try to quick hit with the 5 or so minutes that we have left. John, you've taken price almost every single year since you and Joe took over, but you didn't take price this year for a lot of reasons. Fair to think about, normalcy returning for price in 2021. Is that the right way to think about things?
I would say, you're right. We did not take price increase given the crisis that we're in the summer. We'll evaluate that as we go into next year. As we've talked about on this call, and we make a lot of investments in R&D and marketing and so on, which shows up as benefits to our customers. But we'll evaluate that into next year and then let our customers know first. But it's something that we've done in the past, but we're very aware of the situation that we're in.
Okay. And what about tweaking the Advantage program? I always thought that would be a stealth way of getting better realized price, or are your guys all over that? And if you change that ever so slightly, the message boards are going to light up and you're going to feel the ramifications of it. I'd just be curious on that because there's massive discounts through Advantage, right? I mean, you're a Diamond Plus and you're getting a 44% discount off list. I mean, is there an ability to tweak that program and see it show up on the P&L?
There's always ways we can adjust things, and with Advantage, you brought that up. We kind of grandfathered those because the volumes obviously were impacted this year, so we grandfathered the tiers that they were in for this year into next year. But we'll assess things kind of holistically because you're right. I mean, it's not just about the list price changes; it's also about the discounts that you have, and we'll look at that holistically. But we're all about trying to make sure that we pull the right levers to drive the best return. And in some cases,
hey John, if I could jump in on that question too, is like John mentioned before, there's a lot of variables on our ASP, and we've seen people sour on the stock because of a drop in ASP on a quarter, right? Thinking it was competitive related or whatever. Best to watch our gross margins. Watch your gross margin line or whatever. A lot of things will shift around in that piece, but we feel good about that long-term capability of maintaining and growing that gross margin piece.
Okay, great. And maybe just, John, I'm going to stick with you for a moment. On CapEx, Joe, when you came in and took over Align, I think the CapEx accelerated. You made a lot of investments. You localized treatment planning and fabrication, actually bought some buildings, I believe, as well. John, I think it was at the Analyst Day in 2019. It might have been out at the GP Summit where you said, hey, watch our free cash flow conversion in coming years. CapEx might be coming down on an absolute basis, obviously with revenues growing. But then, Joe, at the recent Analyst Day, you talked about continuing to localize the treatment planning, et cetera. John, anything just to talk about on that CapEx? Does it stay at these elevated levels, or when we think out, do we see the free cash flow conversion improving?
I think when you go further out, you might see that come down. But as we've described, there's a lot of localization. There's a lot of investments that we're making. We just opened up a China Greenfield manufacturing center, and that'll continue to need some investments. We're always adding capacity in Mexico and other places to meet this volume demands that we have, and we'll look to localize where it makes sense. So there's some CapEx related to that. But it's all about being closer to our customers, reducing some of that cycle time that you have. And it also helps diversify our manufacturing so that it's not just in one location and so on. So there's a lot of good reasons. Fortunately, in what we've seen in this business, it generates a ton of cash, and it's a great cash flow business. We've been positive free cash flow even during this crisis as we've gone through, and we saw really, really strong improvement in Q3. So I look at it as these are investments that we make to help grow our business, get closer to our customers. So you'll see some of that free cash flow related to that, but But in the end, this is about helping us grow our business.
Okay. Last question.
Just to emphasize too, man, we just going through this COVID crisis, having different treatment planning around the world, different manufacturing, whatever, such a benefit, man. There's a lot of risk factor with just having centralized production. And this CapEx is a return on investment CapEx. It's not insurance CapEx. It's, we know how to do it. We'll put it in places where we get a return.
Okay, very helpful, Joe. Thanks for that. And maybe last two questions, Joe, I think both for you. I go back with the stock to when you got approval in China, 2010, and then it got off the ground in 2012. And then in 2019, it was a $200 million business. How do we think about Brazil in coming years? Is there an analog? I mean, do we see that a $200-300 million business in 3-4 years? Does it grow a lot faster than what we saw China do because of digitalization? Maybe talk about the biggest geographic opportunities for Align over the next 1 to 3 years.
Well, when you look at having been in international business my whole life, it's so hard to compare countries, But I'd say when you look at the Brazilian market, you're looking at one of the biggest aesthetic markets, right? And with people in general that have enough of a pocketbook in order to afford it. I'd say the analog to that is Spain. You know how big Spain is to us over in Europe. There's a very big analog in a sense of an aesthetic in Spain and aesthetic in Brazil. So the kind of growth rates that we're seeing there, we think we can maintain them. And it's not just Brazil, it's Latin America in general. We bought our distribution, agreements around Latin America. We went direct in those areas too. So John, I'll let you jump in, but we feel really good about, I don't want to make a prediction exactly how big it'll be with China at a certain point in time, but we're excited about the Brazilian market. We have good leadership down there with that team. And we think we have a really good runway.
I mean, it starts with the market opportunity. You have 200 million people in Brazil, many more when you expand out to Latin America. In Brazil, there's 3 times the number of orthodontists than in the U.S. And you have people who want to look good. They want to feel good about themselves. So huge population, people want to look good with a lot of orthodontists. It really is the right combination for a huge growth opportunity. And we're investing, adding salespeople, marketing, doing all the things that you do to help grow this business. And I think at Simon's Investor Day talked about being a top 10 market. I think by the time we get to the next Investor Day, it'd be a top 5 market. And we want to continue to grow in that area.
Okay, great. And maybe just to end, guys, anything you want to call out, as we look forward? I mean, John, maybe just to push you a little bit, Align never took their foot off the gas, right? With the investments. Joe, you didn't furlough employees, you didn't cut employees. You kept the spend. When I think about the op margin for 3Q at 28%, it's not a situation where you suspended a lot of costs. The business came back faster, so you had like inflated op margins in 3Q. Do we think about this as some level of normal? I mean, obviously it's going to ebb and flow, but we don't think about this as a inflated 3Q event and then the bottom drops out. We might see some of this momentum carrying into 2021.
John, I'll let John answer that one, but I'll tell you, remember, we didn't lay anyone off or anything, but we delayed hiring across the business too. And so a lot of the tailwind we fight in operating margins, you grow in a 20-30% growth business, you got to have resources ahead of the capacity that you're going to need. And that's what we fight all the time. But John, you're much better at this.
I would look at, when we look at our long-term growth model, the 25-30%, sometimes you're going to get, some quarters it might be above that, might be below that. It's just the timing as you go through the year. Typically we get some increased leverage as you go through the year. You've made your sales and other investments, and then you get some leverage as you go through. Third quarter was great for us. It was a reflection of some of the recovery and the investments that we were making. But I wouldn't look at that as, as being, too high or too low or anything. This is just a reflection of the growth opportunities that we have in the business. We're going to continue to make investments, as we spoke about at Investor Day, to be able to grow into this market. And we feel good about Q3, and like we said, the momentum had continued into Q4.
Okay, great, guys. Why don't we end there? I want to thank you for your time and going out and doing the bus tour again. Good to see you virtually. Hopefully soon, in person one day. And guys, have a great close to the year and have a great holiday with the families.
Thanks, John. Thanks for the interest. Appreciate it.